I'm going to go over a strategy that you can use to flip that switch going into games. Hey there, I'm Eli Straw, mental performance coach and the founder of SuccessStartsWithin.com. I got a question about how you can flip the switch going into games, meaning how you can start a game with confidence or in the flow state. Now, I have a two-part approach to this, and it's the same approach that I use when I'm working one-on-one with athletes in mental performance coaching. What this two-part strategy is going to do is it's going to look at what you can do leading into a game to try to generate that state or that mindset. And then it's also going to take a look at what you can do during a game if you happen to get out of that mindset or you become distracted. So what we're going to do first is we're going to look at what you can do leading into a game. Now, I know it's a little frustrating for me to say, but we can't really force you to be into the flow state because, by the very nature and definition of the flow state, it happens by just allowing things to happen when you're playing. And it's the state that happens when, you're just fully focused in the game and everything just happens with ease. Now, we can't really force that because as soon as you try to force yourself to be in the flow, you're putting resistance in there, and resistance is going to keep you from being in the flow state altogether. The same thing with confidence. If you try really hard to play with confidence, you're not going to be focused on the right things. So instead, what we want to focus on is we want to focus on some steps and actions that you can take that are going to put you in the best position to get into the flow state and get into that confident state going into a game. And this is where a pregame routine becomes very helpful. Now, with a pregame routine, what we're going to do is we're going to put together different actions and exercises and steps that you can take going into a game. Now, we're going to actually split this into two different parts. There's the night before part and then the day of part, and that's going to take place on game day. Now, the night before part, this is going to include, a few different exercises that you can do to almost start to generate that attitude and that mindset the day before. Now, if we look at something that can keep an athlete from being in the flow state or performing with confidence, one of the things that's going to stand out is being really anxious or even being very fearful. If you're anxious or fearful going into a game, it's much less likely that you're going to play with confidence, be in the flow state, and altogether just be able to flip that switch. So what we need to do is we need to work on generating a mindset that is the opposite of any sort of fear and anxiety. And a lot of times this is going to be generating a calmer mindset, especially the night before. So what I want to do is I'm going to talk very briefly about a few different exercises that I think are very helpful for the night before phase of this pregame routine, and then also the day of phase and the game day phase of the pregame routine. Then what I want you to do is I want you to choose from those and start putting them into practice. Because one thing that's very important with this whole idea, this whole strategy, is that it takes work, it takes practice on your part. You're probably not going to apply some of these tools and immediately be able to flip that switch. Because what you're really after is more control over the mindset that you have when you perform your best. The more that you use these exercises, the more control you get, the more comfortable you get with getting yourself into that mindset, and so the better it's going to be for you to flip that switch going into a game. So there are about 3 different exercises that I really like for the night before phase of a pregame routine. One of them is going to be some breath work. You can either do some count breathing or you can do some mindfulness meditation. Another one is going to be some visualization. I think visualization is fantastic the night before because it allows you to begin imagining how you want the game to go. And, if there are specific situations within the game where you're a little bit more nervous or you're not as confident as some other parts of the game, you can focus your visualization on those areas. Now, another thing that I really like for the night before phase is doing any sort of research that you can do for your opponent. Now, this might seem a little odd when we're thinking about flipping that switch and getting you into that ideal mindset, but the more prepared you feel, the better you feel like you are in terms of knowing what your competition is going to do. The more likely you are to be calm and confident and focused going into the game, which is going to be easier for you to get into that flow state and get into a confident state as you play. So any sort of research that you can do is going to be helpful the night before. And now there's actually one more exercise you can do the night before, and that's reading some self-talk. If you go through a self-talk routine, that can be very helpful to do the night before as well. Now for the day of phase of this pregame routine, a lot of the exercises are going to be pretty similar. It's always very helpful to do some visualization before the game. It's always very helpful to do some mindfulness meditation or some breath work before the game. But you also want to make sure at this point that you set some objectives for games. Now, these objectives are very, very important whenever we're talking about getting into that flow state. Playing with confidence is one thing. Confidence means you go out there and you trust in yourself and you really feel like you're able to go out there and perform, and you perform freely. When we're talking about this flow state, that flow state is honestly the ideal mindset to be in when you play. You're not worried about anything. You're not thinking about anybody else. You are completely consumed in what you're doing, and you're honestly doing it to the best of your abilities. As I said earlier, we can't force that state, but we can get you very, very close to it by examining what are the characteristics of being in the flow state. Well, one of the main characteristics of being in the flow state is that you're not thinking about a whole lot of stuff. You are so focused on what you're doing, you're so present with what you're doing, that you don't have a lot of thoughts about how the game's going to go, and you especially don't have a lot of fearful thoughts about, am I going to make this mistake, and what are these people going to think of me? Now, if we know that this flow state is kind of characterized by not having a lot of thoughts, well, we unfortunately can't just snap our fingers and eliminate all of our thoughts. But what we can do is simplify thinking when it comes to games. And so what you can do before games to begin simplifying your thinking is you can set some objectives. Now, these objectives for games are going to be very simple parts of your game, parts of the process of your game that you want to focus on. A great example of this is a basketball player who sets the objective to stay in his legs when he's playing. What he does is he just keeps reminding himself, stay in my legs, stay in my legs, stay in my legs. Now, that may not seem like it's going to have much to do with his shooting, but it's actually an objective that I've had a basketball player use in the past, because what it did was it kept his attention on something very simple, something that he could control that was part of his game. Now, as he focused more on staying in his legs, that did translate to better defense because he was in a better defensive stance. And it also translated to better offense because he was in a better just athletic stance in general. But most importantly, it kept his focus simple. So he wasn't thinking about, am I going to miss this shot? How am I going to do on defense? Is coach going to pull me out of the game? All he was focused on was staying in his legs. Another example of an objective that I've used with athletes is focusing on giving full effort. Now, focusing on giving full effort, that is an objective. It's less technical than staying in your legs in basketball, but it goes off the same idea where you're keeping your focus very simple. You're just focused on giving effort. All in all, setting objectives going into games, very simple objectives, it goes off the idea of muscle memory. Whenever you're in the flow state, the real reason that this flow state is so helpful is because it takes your thinking mind out of it, and it allows your body to just take over. It allows your muscle memory to take over. When we simplify focus and thinking in terms of using objectives, we allow your muscle memory to take over. So setting objectives is going to be another great exercise that you can do as part of your pregame routine. Now, just for some additional exercises, you can also talk to your teammates if that's going to be something that's going to keep you relaxed. You could also repeat some self-talk again. You could do any sort of kind of remembering past successes, because that's going to generate confidence. But the main idea that I want to get across is that if you want to generate a state of confidence, or you want to get closer to playing in the flow state, and you want to be able to flip that switch, what's really going to help is putting together a consistent pregame routine that is tailored towards getting yourself into the optimal mindset going into a game. So that's the first part of being able to flip this switch. The second part is actually going to be during a game when you kind of find yourself in that mindset, but then you're pulled out of that mindset, right? Maybe you get distracted by a mistake, or maybe you get distracted by something your coach says, or the fact that your team is losing. Sometimes you're in that flow state, you get pulled out of it, and now you think, okay, how can I get back into it? Or you're feeling really confident, a mistake happens, and now you're like, okay, how do I feel confident again for the rest of the game? This is where we come up with a strategy that you can use in that moment to recognize that you are becoming distracted or thinking about something else. And then we also have a part of that strategy where we generally work to calm you down, and then the last part of it is refocusing yourself on your objective. And that's why that objective is so important for you to set before the game, because whenever you start to become distracted during the game, or whenever during the game you find yourself out of this flow state or not feeling confident, really what we need to do is we need to get you back to that very simple thinking, because what can easily happen is you start to overthink at that point. So what I like to use for the in the game part of this strategy is a thought stopping phrase. Now, a thought stopping phrase, it is something that you say to yourself, but what I've found more important about it is this structure of it. So it's a 3-part structure where the first part, you kind of remind yourself to let that go, don't worry about it, move on from the mistake, learn from it, whatever you want to tell yourself to let go of whatever has distracted you and pulled you out of that flow state. The middle part is where you want to do some sort of breathing, whether it's count breathing, whether you just take a few deep breaths. You want to do some breathing at that point, because when you're in the flow state and when you're feeling confident, we know for the most part, you're playing in a very present state, right? Your awareness is focused on what you're doing, especially if you're in that flow state. So remember, we can't force you to get into that flow state, but we can start getting your mind almost primed for that flow state. So you want to take a few deep breaths, because it's going to work to calm yourself down, especially if you're a little upset over a mistake. And it's also going to work to bring that attention and that awareness into the present moment. Then the third part of this is where you remind yourself what your objective was, whether that is to focus on giving full effort, whether that is to focus on staying low in your defensive stance or staying low in your legs, or whether that's to focus on watching the ball all the way into your glove. Whatever your objective is, that's going to be that third part. Remind yourself of that objective. Because remember, if we're going to put this very simply, the best way for you to get into the flow state or get yourself close to that flow state during games is by keeping your thinking very simple. You just want to allow your muscle memory and allow your body to do what it knows how to do. So if you want to be able to flip that switch, get yourself closer to performing in the flow state and performing with confidence, I really recommend you create yourself a pregame routine tailored towards generating that mindset. And then you apply this thought-stopping phrase during games so that whenever you become distracted or you're getting upset, you can redirect your attention and bring that mindset back, being able to flip that switch for yourself to perform your best on a consistent basis. Now, in addition to using a pregame routine and having this thought-stopping phrase, another part of playing with confidence and playing in the flow state, but especially playing with confidence, is going to be building the general mental skill of being a confident athlete. And so that's why right here I've linked a video that goes into detail on some different exercises that you can be doing just on an ongoing basis to build your confidence as an athlete. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I put out new videos each week on sports psychology and mental training.